Greetings, this is Phil Amerson with the podcast To Be and To Do. And today I want to do a little sharing with you around the whole notion of Christian nationalism. In Indiana, we have a lieutenant governor Micah Beckwith, who is a pastor, and he claims that he's a Christian nationalist. And recently, he actually talked about how important it was to close out funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion, saying it was a way to get back to what God intended for America. Um, the so-called Christian nationalism has mushroomed across our nation and body politics. There have been lots of books that have pointed this out. Andrew Whitehead, who teaches at Indiana University in Indianapolis, wrote one entitled Taking America Back for God. Tim Alberta has written a wonderful book entitled The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. I encourage you to take a look at either one of those books. Part of what they help us know is that this is not a new phenomenon. It is something that's reappearing buried deeply in the soils of our common life. I suspect if you're like me, when you were in elementary school or junior high, you learned the long word anti-disestablishmentarianism. I learned that it was the longest word in the English language. Later, I found out it's not quite. It only has 28 letters. So, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's the fourth longest word. I won't try to spell or pronounce the top three, but the folks at Merriam-Webster say that anti-disestablishmentarianism is little used, and so maybe it doesn't qualify for the dictionary any longer. But let me tell you something about the history, because it's related to Christian nationalism. Anti-disestablishmentarianism arose from historic struggles in Britain over the role of religion in the government. The word argues religion, the Church of England in this case, should get special privileges, government benefits, support, and patronage. Increasingly, I think this is one of the challenges we face in the United States. Some think that this nation should be exclusively Christian. This form of Christianity is called dominionism. It's that we're to have dominion over everything else, and really the Christians should be the ones in charge. This is called a restorationist project to restore the United States to what it originally was. Of course, this is a simplistic narrative about our nation's founding that isn't rooted in reality. There were many cultural and religious expressions. Even Jefferson referred to our nation as a great experiment where there's diversity that's a part of our religious structures. In fact, the First Amendment to the US Constitution, known as the Establishment Clause, do you hear that? Anti-disestablishment clarity. What's the word again? Opens with these words: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the United States was something fresh, never seen before. It was birthed as the American experiment, something untethered to a monarch or a single religious set of beliefs or church. Evangelical scholar Kevin DeYoung acknowledges an understandable hunger right now among Christians for something like Christian nationalism. However, he concludes, after looking at some of the books that have been published supporting this restorationist belief, that biblical instincts are better than nationalistic ones. And the ethos of Christian nationalism project fails, he says, the biblical smell test. Kevin DeYoung offers a clear window on the rootage of such narrowly drawn beliefs that are rooted more in grievance than research. He says, quote, the message that ethnicides should mix, that ethnicities should mix, that heretics can be killed, that violent revolution is already justified, and that our nation needs a charismatic Caesar-like leader to raise our consciousness and galvanize the will of the people may bear resemblance to certain blood and soil nationalisms of the 19th and 20th centuries. But DeYoung says it's not a nationalism that honors and represents the name of Christ. He concludes Christian nationalism isn't the answer the church or our nation needs. I agree. As a teenager in the early 1960s, I remember sermons in churches where I attended where it was said that if John Kennedy were elected, our nation would become Roman Catholic and the Pope would control everything that happened. A majority of US voters, fortunately, didn't buy that argument. And we were blessed with the gift of John Kennedy. With all his faults, he still helped us open wider the doors of what it means to be a nation that welcomes everyone. Then a few years after Kennedy was elected, in my early adulthood, I remember hearing the evangelist Tom Speaker, an African-American preacher who I can recall said, all the pictures of Christ that I saw were Anglo-Saxon, middle class. He was a Protestant Republican. He said, there is no way that I could relate to that kind of Christ. Skinner painted the image of a white Jesus wrapped in an American flag. He was saying the Jesus long marketed by the American church wasn't a faithful representation of the dark-skinned Jesus of the gospel. Teaching in a United Methodist school in the Republic of Panama in those years, I was further shaped by the awareness that the Christian faith and the Christian church is so much broader. Today, Christian nationalism continues to market a fraudulent version of who Christ was and who he is for us today. Some call for a great replacement, where non-Christians are moved out of power and out of the country. They're engaged in some kind of plot to give birthright privilege to white Americans. You remember that awful torchlight parade and the chant in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, don't you, where carrying the torches, white nationalists were chanting, Jews will not replace us. Such entitlement beliefs are not only profoundly racist and anti-Semitic, but they are not faithful to US history or the Christian message. Whether as Christians or patriotic Americans or both, how shall we respond? Well, let me close by remembering the words of a British Methodist preacher, a fellow named Donald English, who used to carry his soapbox into Hyde Park in London, and he would preach in the afternoons. And one of the great lines that he would deliver when he was preaching was, the world has enough salesmen of the gospel. What we need now are more free samples. This is Phil Amerson wishing you the best and saying, let's be a sample for what Christianity really is about. And it's not about excluding anyone. God bless.